It's going to be a football game tonight now. No doubt. It's going to be a football game here. Okay. I done been here before. All right, let's go, baby.
9. Rushing 4, ball comes out of the hands of Newton. It's on the ground, and it's still on the ground. Picked up by T.J. Ward at the 4-yard line. Vaughn Miller did it again.
Alabama back on top of the college football world.
Ladies and gentlemen, football to the max.
Your host, Sean Garmer, Gary Vaughn, and Randy Isbell.
Welcome to another Football to the Max college edition, and week 3 lived up to all the hype. You know, we talked about week 1 being this big ordeal. Week 3 gave us even crazier matchups and crazier results for some of the teams, and in lots of scares as well for some of these big teams. Guys, I mean, before we get into breaking down certain games or whatever, I mean, geez, I don't think you could ask for a better beginning and ending, honestly.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the weekend. You know, some very interesting games going on. We had some heartbreaks for some teams, and of course, we had some. Let's just be honest, some teams make a statement this weekend and really, change things when it came to the polls around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked the wrong weekend to go to a college football game because I missed a lot of the action live as I went to the Washington State Cougars and Idaho Vandals blowout. So I had to kick back and watch some of the highlights, but the second half of Saturday was great as well. So still lots of action I got to watch.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I am your host of this shindig, Sean Garman with me. Of course, you guys already heard their voices, but Gary Vaughn and Randy Isbell, and we talked about the Houston game on Thursday, so we don't have to go through that again. But Randy, I mean, are you now a believer in Louisville after that whack, absolute thumping that they gave Florida State on?
Listen, how can you not be? I mean, I was worried that it was, Lamar Jackson and nobody else, and they were beating up on these weaker teams. Well, they didn't just beat Florida State because Lamar Jackson is amazing. Their defense came together. They completely shut down Florida State for the first 3 quarters until the game was completely out of hand. Brandon Radcliffe looked great as well. They were throwing the ball, running the ball, just all facets of the game for this Louisville Cardinals team. I get it now. I see what everyone else is seeing, and they've done it against a very difficult competition. It's just, I was a little worried going into this, that especially when I saw the score, at halftime of, okay, well, maybe it's just Florida State doesn't start games very well. They had that same scare with Ole Miss. I'm like, okay, again, I'm at the stadium up here in Pullman watching the game, and they kept showing the scores. I'm like, all right, well, this is going to start coming back to earth here a little bit. And next thing you know, you look up, and Louisville's up in the 50s. And just completely trounced them. And listen, Louisville showed, even though they were at home, they were far superior than the Seminoles on Saturday and deserved to be in a top 5 contention.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know we were talking about this last Thursday, and there was a lot of talk about the Seminole defense just being too strong. And I'll say it again. I really wasn't buying the Seminole defense. I just didn't feel like they were as strong as people were giving them credit for. I don't know. There was something about them, especially the game against Ole Miss. I just kind of felt like that they weren't prepared the way they needed to be prepared. They kind of came into this thing thinking that they were going to just own it. And I think Louisville showed that, man, they're loaded with talent. They've got a lot of good things going for them. It's just not on offense. Their defense has a lot to speak for itself. So, and you got to give them credit. I mean, not only that, this team has, I'm going to go ahead and say it now, probably the Heisman Trophy winner taking care of business.
Yeah, he's probably going to have to continue to have crazy games like that in order not to probably be beat out by some others. But if he can sort of keep that pace, I think there's no way in the world he doesn't win that Heisman Trophy because, Lord, how many? He has like 16 touchdowns in 3 games? I mean, my God, ridiculous. And to put all that up against Florida State, just, geez. And like you said, it wasn't just him, it's the defense too.
Yeah, there's 18 touchdowns that he's a part of. But, man, can we just get to October 1st already? I want to see them go into Clemson. I want to see that matchup now, that they were able to destroy Florida State at home. I want to see what they could do against another playoff contender on the road.
And not to mention they get Houston later as well, late in the end of the year. So if Houston's still where you think they're going to be at, this could certainly be really interesting going forward if they happen to get by Clemson or they only have that Clemson loss on their record and they get there. That's going to be another great matchup. But, Alabama also got a huge scare again from Ole Miss. Their rival that they have lost to the past 2 seasons, they're able to come back and win 48-43. For a while, it looked like Ole Miss was just going to run away with the thing. Amazing comeback, honestly. But, I mean, it's Alabama. It's what they do.
You'd also say this is Ole Miss, and that's what they do, is they jump out to huge leads and then just squander them away. So, absolutely great effort by Alabama to get back into this on the road, not to give up. They ran all over them. Some great defensive plays late in that game. Some huge goal line stands. I remember this game was coming to the end on my drive back, and it was really interesting to listen to the radio guys who basically stopped doing their radio show and were doing play-by-play for this game because they got so invested in it, and to watch them completely lose their minds over some really questionable calls late in the game. And basically, like I said, it was 20 or 30 minutes where the radio show just broke down to them reacting to plays and calls, and it was really interesting to see them just completely lose themselves in such a great game that Alabama and Ole Miss were putting on.
Yeah, I know. It was one of those games that, basically makes ratings happen because it is just that enthralling. I mean, people were able to get sucked in because that game was so close at the point. And, back and forth. And, Alabama just does what Alabama does, and that's find a way to win and play dirty, do whatever they got to do to get in there and get that W. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it's crazy. I think I had a lot of people going, man, God, I hate Alabama. I'm like, trust me, my team is in the SEC. I'm not particularly fond of them either, but you kind of just expect this with Nick Saban teams, and the other team will get out to a big lead, and here they come, whether it's to defense or just knocking them down. They do it, and Alabama is able to basically retain their top spot with that win. And you get into the other sort of big matchup of there were a bunch of big matchups. Let's not kid ourselves here, but the one that sort of a lot of people were pointing to, this could really change what happens in the landscape. Ohio State and Oklahoma. Ohio State go into Oklahoma, and JT Barrett, no problem.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, it was kind of a, interesting because that energy in Memorial Stadium was so out of the roof excitement. I mean, it was just so high. And then the Oklahoma Sooners couldn't match it. I mean, that's kind of the way I felt Ohio State came in there and they had a purpose and they shut down OU. And Baker Mayfield, man, the poor kid. I mean, he's had a lot of people judge him, and I'm not sold on him a whole lot either. But man, he's just not been the guy that he needs to be to lead that Sooner offense to the level that if they're going to be elite, he's not there yet. Ohio State proved what elite is, and they took care of business pretty handily here, and Oklahoma just sadly just couldn't stand up to what they needed to do.
Yeah, I was really high on Baker Mayfield going into the season, and it was because of him why I thought Oklahoma had a great chance to make the playoffs, but they failed at both of their big tests early on in the season and now need to do something amazing to impress everybody to get themselves back into it. I think, unfortunately, we're not out of September yet, but those championship aspirations for Oklahoma are pretty much dead.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, even if you run the table, it's still a tough ask. You still got Texas to deal with. Not to mention, you got Oklahoma State later in the year too. I mean, it's not a joke, the schedule they still got left, and I wouldn't be surprised if they lose one of those. And even if they win out and win the championship game, you're still going to need a lot of help to be thought of back into that conversation. Of course, Michigan and Ohio State could kind of cancel each other out. If say one of them loses before then and the other team that was undefeated loses or something like that, but it's just you're still it's possible, but it's really thin as far as what what you're going to really be able to expect out of them and everything. I mean, looking at some other games here, Michigan State defeat Notre Dame. Of course, there's also a Notre Dame team that were beat by Texas at home. Some people are still doubting Michigan State. Where do you guys kind of thinking of them in that process?
Yeah, I'm very high on Michigan State. I actually took them to win this game, but because it was in Notre Dame, and I do like Kaiser, I knocked it way down my confidence. But I really thought Michigan State had a good chance here to come in and get the win. Actually, they controlled the game a bit better than I thought. The fourth quarter went all Notre Dame, and they almost were able to come back and make the crazy comeback. But for the most part, Michigan State solidified themselves as a contender to go in to Notre Dame and get the big win like that. They've only played Furman going into this, and they didn't look that dominant. So you didn't know where they're going to be. And now, next week they get Wisconsin. So another big test for the Spartans. But, if they can get that big win, you got to think about them maybe in the top 5.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And they proved a lot to me. They really did. And I came into that game thinking that Notre Dame was going to find a way to win. Yeah, it was a home game. You gave them that advantage. But not only that, I really did give her a lot of credit to, that Notre Dame defense. I really felt like they had enough speed to slow down Michigan State's offense. And I'll be honest with you, I thought Kaiser was going to be good enough to help, that offense lead them to a decent victory here. But that wasn't the case. Michigan State just proved once again that, don't underestimate us. We can definitely be amongst the top teams.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of us were kind of just sitting here going, well, they haven't played anybody. Let's see what happens in this game. I think it is fair at times to think about, okay, how good is Notre Dame really? Do we really want to put so much stock in Michigan State, wait till they play someone else? I don't think I'm going to hate on people that are in that camp, because I can certainly see that narrative being fair, but I think Michigan State showed you a lot here, and they're ranking where they're at, I think is sort of justified by this game. So I don't necessarily think that it's way overboard. If you don't think they need to be in the top 10, I can understand it, but I think they kind of justify themselves being where they are. I mean, Washington's blanked a no-nonsense team. Clemson hit South Carolina State so hard they had to shorten the quarters. Finally waking up, and their defense showing up as well, not just the offense. Michigan had some issues with Colorado, but they ended up putting them away. That was really interesting. Colorado just gets out to that big lead, and then Michigan just says, nope, this is not happening. And they knock them down. Stanford just went all over USC to the fact that USC is changing quarterbacks now again. Anything from any of that?
Yeah, that was interesting. The Colorado and Michigan. I mean, once again, maybe one of those situations where Michigan came in and thought we're going to blank this team. We don't really need to worry about it. Maybe a little arrogance, and then they found out, hey, we've actually got to play. So that was kind of interesting, but them coming back and getting a big victory is no surprise. Michigan's a very talented team. I think they've got a lot going for them, but just found it very interesting that they found themselves in that situation. I really thought they were going to come in, start, and put their foot on the pedal. They just didn't do that.
It was nice to see Clemson, even though obviously they weren't playing any kind of difficult competition, just to come out and show the country, yes, we are this good. We struggled to get out of the blocks, but now we're ready to go. We're ready to play tougher competition, and we're ready to get back to that national championship game. So even though it wasn't against anybody important, it was just nice to see Clemson show exactly who they are.
Right, another struggle, and we would have really been thinking about, man, what do you think about Clemson right now? So going into that first ACC game next week, now it's going to get interesting. Do we get Clemson that we saw in this game, or do we get the Clemson we've seen in the previous two, where they had cupcakes as well? Tennessee had Ohio, and they almost lost. Wisconsin almost lost to Georgia State. Georgia almost lost again. God, it's like Georgia just wants to give everybody a heart attack every time you watch them if you're a Georgia fan. Any of these three kind of stand out to you as far as like, man, they really shouldn't have been this close?
Well, Tennessee, I think we just have to get to this point that they're not going to blow anyone out. It doesn't matter the level of competition. They keep it close to the vest. They keep it interesting. Georgia, to me, is the more interesting one out of all of these, just for the fact that they barely came back to win this game, and now they go to Ole Miss, who in 2 games already this year have taken big leads and blown them. So let's see what happens with the Bulldogs, who like to keep it close and make their fans sweat the entire game, and an Ole Miss team who loves to jump out to 28-point leads and then blow them. So Saturday will be interesting at Ole Miss.
Anything for you, Gary?
You know what? I mean, once again, Randy kind of talked about Tennessee. I'll talk about Georgia a little bit here. I just don't know about Georgia now. I mean, to me, they find ways to win games, but man, I'm just waiting for those, those games where they just can't pull it out. They just always play it way too close.
Yeah, they do. There's a couple of Georgia people that I know, and they're in a chat with me, and I'm sitting there going, God, they got to be freaking out right now. Like this, I think they were still awake when I have to stay up after I get off work on Saturday nights I have to go back in at like 4 or 5 in the morning, so I basically stay up all night, and they were still awake at like, I think it was 1 o'clock or almost 2 o'clock with that Georgia game. And they're like, well, we were going to go to bed, but they're making us freaking freak out here. So we have to stay up now. This is what Georgia's going to do. Wisconsin, you're playing Georgia State. Like, that shouldn't have been close. I don't know what's going on, but that should not have been a close game at all. Texas A&M, they wound up taking care of Auburn. We thought that it was going to be upset alert, and that wound up not being the case, even though it was tight for the first half. LSU did the business as well. Florida took care of our alma mater, Gary. Shed a tear there.
It was kind of close, though. They only scored 5 points in the first quarter, I think it was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just letting you know, I mean,
Yeah,
we almost had them.
yeah.
Almost.
5 more points than you scored the whole game, but that's okay.
We didn't get to score anything, but yeah, you're right.
Of course, we're referring to North Texas. So how far, do you, we all had different rankings here for Florida State. It wound up being 16 for them. For us, AP has them at 13. Other people have them, around that area. Do you think that's sort of fair for Florida State? How far for them to fall after that big loss?
I think so. I think that's about, the right range because of the fact, they're still a great team. They played a team that I feel like is proving more and more every day that they're in the running to be in that top 4 in that playoff. And I can't imagine you knock a team that was that high, all the way down to the 20s. I think in the teens somewhere they belong.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you lose as bad as they did. You have to drop quite a ways. I think if it wasn't also just the coming out party for Louisville, where, like I said, I now believe that they are a top tier team, I would have dropped them even further. But to be honest, the story more is of Louisville than it is Florida State. So they're going to drop. I forget where they are in the exact polls, but they're 13th there, and I think we had them a little bit lower. So I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. I've seen some people just drop them out completely, and I'm like, well, hold on. It's just one game, and there's times where people you just get blown out. I don't think that they need to be dropping that far, but especially when you're talking about some teams that have 2 losses that are still being ranked. It is an ACC opponent. It is a conference and divisional opponent. If there's going to be people that are going to know them as well as anybody else, it's going to be them. It's going to be a Louisville. So, I think you give them the benefit of the doubt right now when they get this nasty schedule they're about to come up to with South Florida, who's undefeated, and they're frisky. They're a team that people are saying is supposed to win the other side of the ACC. That Houston's not on, and it's in South Florida, then they got North Carolina and Miami. They could lose another one. It's not out of the question, but, having this loss, maybe it wakes them up and maybe Florida State just starts trouncing people. Who knows? It's all about how you deal with losses. Baylor beat some cupcakes, or beat another cupcake. Miami they nowhere near the upset alert that everybody was kind of talking about. I talked about it. Nebraska won that close game against Oregon. Randy, this was a really fun game to watch, and Nebraska, I think, certainly deserves to be in that echelon now of at least being in the top 25 if you don't have them there.
Yeah, I have them just outside. There was a few other teams I wanted to put into my top 25 that I wanted to give some credit to, but Nebraska was right on that cusp. And honestly, if I would have done a little bit more research, they might have been able to sneak in there. I'm still not 100% sure I like the idea of Ole Miss or Oklahoma being in the top 25, having already lost twice. I would have had no problem knocking them out. I think I had Ole Miss 25th and probably should have put Nebraska there. But listen, they're 3-0. They played a difficult Oregon team who pushed them all the way. Tommy Armstrong Jr. looked great, throwing for 3 touchdowns, running for another one. It was their first real test of the season, and they answered the call. And to be honest, they don't really have another test until the end of October when they go to Wisconsin. So they could rack off some wins and move up the ranks pretty easily.
Gary, how do you take? We sort of had this discussion on and off here, whether it's through message or off the air. But we wound up having Texas and Oklahoma ranked. I won't say where. You can go to WTMnet.com for that. The AP also has both of them ranked, and also has Ole Miss ranked, which we don't. How do you feel about these teams, sort of, and then some places, like I don't know if it looks like Iowa is out completely in a lot of polls. We kept them in. How do you feel about all these teams? Iowa, of course, losing to North Dakota State, which is basically an FCS team masquerading as an FBS team. They are now undefeated since 2010 against FBS opponents. I mean, geez, they're 5-time consecutive champions of the FCS. I mean, at some point, maybe move up, North Dakota State. I mean, how do you feel about these teams, Gary, sort of being in rankings right now? What do you think?
Well, I kind of gather, where you guys are coming from. I think that Texas, they kind of lost a close game. And so I think, it was well deserved for them to fall where they fell. Oklahoma, I know you guys really don't like Oklahoma being in the rankings. I still say they played two very good teams, two teams that are upper echelon teams right now. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be ready to knock them out. Oklahoma State, I'm not as impressed. I think Oklahoma State's a team that I'm glad is not in the AP, just because of the fact that they played a Pittsburgh team who they had to fight and scrap to beat. And then they played a Central Michigan team that, I mean, sure, they beat them on a fluke, but like we talked about last week, they played them that close. If they're such a good team, they shouldn't play that close. We're not seeing really good teams play bad teams that close unless that team's a really good, team that's, so I have a feeling that, a lot of these teams that are on the, where they're at, from our point of view, from our poll, are maybe some still holding on to, some things they did earlier in the year, or maybe some preconceived ideas. And I think same with the AP. I think the AP is holding on to some teams as well. So I think there could be some mismatches here, some things that are going to shake out. We're still early in the polls. I don't freak out this early. Later on, once we get into some serious football games, some games that are really going to matter, that's when I think we can look at our polls and say, oh boy, this was a really bad decision in that poll. This poll is wrong. This one's right,
It's obviously difficult because all these things are subjective, and it depends on how many voters you have, and obviously AP is going to have more voters than we do, and other places are going to have less, and it's just, I look at it as, okay, Oklahoma lost to Houston, who, yes, they are a very, very good team, but Oklahoma should be better than Houston. They play Texas in sort of the Dallas area, so it's not that they were in they were in Houston, but it's not like they were just outnumbered with fandom or anything. And then you go and lose at home like that to Ohio State, and it wasn't even. It's not that, and maybe the delay had something to do with it, where they had to delay the kickoff and all that because of the thunderstorms. But like Oklahoma losing like that, it's just at home. Just for me, it cemented that right now they're not the team that everybody was proclaiming them to be in the preseason. They need to be out. I think Ole Miss, they kept it close with both of the teams. Yes, they got up to leads and they blew them, but they kept it close with teams that are at the time when they were playing them, they were elite. We're talking about Alabama's, we're talking about Florida State's at the time. So I don't necessarily have a problem if you keep Ole Miss like down there in the mid-20s, like at the end of your poll. I think Iowa is one of those, like, that's a last-second field goal. If that doesn't go in, they're still where they were, I think. That's just one of those really unfortunate things. Should they have gotten there? No, but again, we're talking about North Dakota State. I just ran off all their accolades. I don't think that that's totally wrong for them to be if you used to have them in a poll. And Oklahoma State, I think, they shouldn't have lost the first time. So I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt on my end of, okay, you played a tough Pittsburgh team that perhaps shouldn't have won the game that they won against Penn State, but they won it. And they went in there. Pittsburgh kept up with them. Maybe, again, the delay with the rain and all that has a difference, but Oklahoma State did win, and I thought that because of the fact that they really shouldn't have lost that game, kind of giving the benefit of the doubt and putting them back in. But, and Texas is just one of these weird things where I see a lot of people just saying they shouldn't be ranked at all because they shouldn't have been that high in the first place. And that now them losing to California, let's be honest, though, that defense couldn't stop anybody. It felt like every time California was going to do anything, they were playing by themselves. Because Texas was not going to stop them. And perhaps if Texas had stuck with one quarterback, or Shane Buechele was not hurt, perhaps this is a different conversation we're having. But, you have that controversial play, too, that you don't know what would have happened the last minute and 20 seconds. But, it's weird. I think Texas maybe deserves to still be in it, but,
and I can understand where people are coming from with it, especially Texas, because of the fact that they still are unproven. Last year they were not very good. People are saying, well, why were they in the rankings in the first place? I get it, and it makes a lot of sense. And really, honestly, right now, looking at this game as being specific, I think it just shows the youth of Texas. They have so many young kids on that team. They're going to get better. And so I don't think if, you're, mad or you're happy about this, you're going to have much to worry about, because I don't know that the Longhorns are going to be very high in the polls in the near future unless they find a way somehow to sneak in. But the Big 12 is kind of a crapshoot right now anyway, so I don't think any of the teams in the Big 12 are in the running.
Especially if Baylor loses a game, it's really going to be a crapshoot.
Baylor will, and they're not as good as people want to give them credit for. I'm embarrassed that where they're ranked anyway, on all the polls.
They still haven't lost the game yet, so whenever they, Oklahoma State, that's going to be a fun game to watch next week. We'll have to see what happens. Sure. Randy, do you have a opinion on any of this here?
Well, to be honest, I'm one of those people that, as far as Texas goes, that they got it ranked a little too high. They just were excited that, they beat Notre Dame. Here we go. Texas is back. And I think they have greatly improved, but as you said, I don't like their defense. I don't think they have much of a defense. Both of their tough tests that they've had so far were both complete shootouts between Notre Dame and Cal. So I have them just out of my top 25. I wouldn't throw the biggest fit if somebody has them there, but again, I like looking at some of these smaller schools that haven't been getting a lot of credit that have been playing really well. San Diego State was on my top 25. They got into a shootout with Cal and beat them. So I like them a little bit higher than Texas. Utah is 3-0 right now, getting ready to get going. They haven't given up more than 19 points in a single game yet. So I like their defense in the Pac-12 right now. So there's a few teams out there that I just felt like weren't getting a ton of recognition going into this week. We saw a lot of big name teams go out, so why not fill it in with some smaller schools?
Fair enough. How do you feel about the Iowa loss there to?
Well, it's like you said, North Dakota State should not be in the FCS. And trust me, I've brought him up a couple times on this podcast. I have a buddy who went to Eastern Washington. He makes me watch those awful games at the terrible red field on TV when we work together on Saturdays. He would love it if North Dakota State would move up, because that's where they belong. And it's really funny to see that if the rankings weren't just for the top 25, North Dakota State would be ranked 27th, according to the AP poll. I don't think they should be that high. I don't think they should even be considered being ranked since they're not even an FBS school, but they should be. And I think they will be once the Big 12 expands and gets a few more teams. I think North Dakota State takes one of the spots that those schools leave behind.
Interesting take there. Yeah, it would be pretty cool to see them not only become an FBS school, but go into one of the Power Five. I mean, that would be pretty awesome.
Well, no, I'm not saying Power Five. I'm saying, the Big 12 is looking at all these schools
Right.
to join in. So when those schools go to the Big 12, they leave an opening in the Mountain West or wherever,
okay, yeah.
and then North Dakota State can fit in there.
I think the Mountain West would be perfect for them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in that sort of area. So, you can. Anything else you guys want to say about the weekend? A team we may not have talked about, or anything else before we mosey along here?
No, I think we hit all the big points here so far.
And and another group of games next week that we'll get to talk about, of course, on the Friday morning show, previewing Week 4. So, lots of conferences got into action already. Like the SEC had some LSU played the Mississippi States and Alabama and Ole Miss and all that. So, we'll get more conferences getting into their actual conference play and more fun stuff happening as we get into Week 4. But until then, of course, go check out our full top 25 on WTMNet.com. That's compiled by the three of us and a few other writers there on the site as well. So, and you'll see them all. We all wrote some blurbs. So, you can let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with the overall ranking, and you can post yours there if you'd like as well. And just thank you for listening to the podcast, and we'll be back on Friday, of course, previewing all of Week 4. Until then, subscribe to everything on the WTM Network and check out the website again, and we'll see you later, everybody.
The following podcast is a W2M Network original production. Visit W2Mnet.com for all of our other great podcasts, plus news, reviews, articles, and opinions from the worlds of wrestling, video games, football, and entertainment.